Our prime minister is suggesting a sort of Article 5 for Ukraine. So instead, sending boots on the ground, which will be very difficult and very little effective now, giving Ukraine an Article 5 status, which means being willing to help to provide active security measures for Ukraine.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we sit down with Roberto Toncig, a retired Italian Army and former government executive with over 40 years of experience in the field of defense and security, spent over 2 decades steeped in international relations and security affairs, most of them spent in challenging positions at various Italian embassies abroad. In addition to Italian and fantastic English, Roberto also speaks German, French, Serbo-Croatian, and Russian. In his post-government work, Roberto is an advisor at Leonardo, focused on regional security for this global defense, security, and aerospace giant. We connected with Roberto thanks to friend of the show and longtime senior intelligence officer Glenn Korn. In this episode, we dive into Italy's security organizations and get Roberto's expert perspectives on Italy and Europe's positioning in light of the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, energy security, China, the Mediterranean, and regional stability. With that, please enjoy this deep dive into all things security related in Europe with Roberto Toncig. Roberto, thank you so much for taking time to sit down with us and chat with us about what's going on globally.
Hi, Ryan. Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure and an exciting experience for me.
I think I speak for all of our listeners when I say I'm jealous that you are in Rome and I am not. I'd like to start. Many of our listeners know Glenn very well. And Glenn put you and I together. He connected us. And I was just wondering if you could share, how do you and Glenn know each other? Where did you meet, or how did you meet?
We met during one common assignment abroad. So we ran into one of these many social occasions. And then we developed a closer link, sharing books, interests, and stories. So it is a very nice friendship.
That's interesting. Any interesting books that Glenn has recommended that you think that the audience might find interesting?
I think you know them all. I think you know them all. I suggested him recently a book by Volkov. It's called The Setup. It's a very interesting novel. I'm curious to hear from Glenn if he ever had an opportunity to read the book.
All right, I'll question him on it. We'll put it in the show notes so people can see. So, Roberto, if I could, just as I mentioned before we hit record, the audience generally is American, not as familiar with Italy's national security organizations, but they are very familiar with the U.S., with the DNI, the CIA, FBI, the military. What does that look like in Italy, just given your background with both the Army in Italy and then civil service for many, many years?
In Italy, our organization is less complicated than yours, luckily, because we're able to mess up even in a simple setup. We have, of course, the defense and Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces. They have their own security structures within their organization that takes care of the mostly tactical intelligence needs. And then we have a strategic organization which is attached to the Prime Minister office. So it's one of the instruments of executive power. There is a department for information for security, it's called, which is the strategic setting element of the organization. And under this department, you have 2 operational agencies. One is for the internal and one is for the foreign intelligence and security. This department and the 2 agencies are the tools. Then we have a political head, which is the prime minister, that usually appoints a dedicated undersecretary of state to coordinate all intelligence activities. What we have a very well developed check and balances system for the intelligence community. There is a parliamentary oversight committee that has the faculty and has the right to interview the heads of the agencies or other relevant figures. And the composition of this committee is 50% is ruling majority, 50% is the opposition, and the head of the control committee has to be from the opposition. I think it's a very effective way to have this control. They cannot interfere, of course, with ongoing operations, but there is a lot that they can deal with.
Interesting. Yeah. The less complex it can be, the better. Certainly not the way that we always tend to operate over here on this side of the Atlantic. As we look at President Trump and this new administration, some of the things that have happened just globally when it comes to international security with Russia and Ukraine in particular recently, the U.S. has pulled back aid for Ukraine. Europe has made quite a statement collectively talking about increasing aid going into Ukraine and supporting their efforts. From what you have seen and the time that you've spent focused on security on the continent and looking at Russia and Ukraine, what are some of your thoughts for how Italy needs to respond given its strategic position within the EU and NATO, but also just in general, what Europe's doing now?
It's the trillion-dollar question. I was born in 1958, so I'm a boomer, okay? And I grew up with this steady image of a benevolent Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam has turned a bit away from us. I think it's a big shock for Europe, and it's a healthy shock, though. It was needed in a way. I think Europe went a bit astray. One definition that I hear from an Italian journalist, a senior journalist, is that Europe is a grass-eating monster. So we did neglect on our security issues. I mean, maybe with the exception of for sure the UK and also France, but all the other countries, we a bit neglected this, and we have been completely relying on the NATO umbrella for our security, which is okay in a way. Now everything is under discussion, and we have to rush to do something. What to do is the big question. Now, the first response that I see now is the availability of funds for rearmament of the continent. Is this enough? I don't think it's enough, because if you look at what we spend as Europe, at the aggregate defense expenditure of Europe and that of Russia, we spend twice as much. So why are we in this position? I think because we were too much focused on our national perspective, and there is a lack of integration. And years ago, I was studying a little bit the strategic compass, which is the document that the European Union refers to in directing the procurement policies and in general in directing the security strategy. And the European strategic compass was completely forgetting about the Mediterranean and paying just lip service to our eastern frontier. At the same time, we were talking within this important document about the Indo-Pacific, which is perfect, it's nice, it's needed, but maybe we should first concentrate a little bit on our own backyard. And this has not been done. So now, again, the European response was about money, is about money, and there are also difficulties here, especially for highly in-debt country like Italy, like my own. But there is little talk about creating a joint European command center. So we don't have real C2 capabilities, command and control. Around the world, I think we have 21 or something like this European missions. Most of them are CIMIC, civil military cooperation. 9, I think, are purely military, but the deployment total is under 5,000 people. So we don't have still the instruments to manage a big military force. So we need to have this, and we have to have also a political mechanism that is different, that needs to be different from the current one. You know that in Europe, all decision has to be taken anonymously,
which is hard, so hard.
Which is hard. I mean, Europe was the European dream was born to avoid confrontations. It was a war-plagued continent that finally found a way to live together in peace. Now we have to come to terms that it's not what is the situation nowadays. So you can easily understand that the sensitivity of the single states and the single populations towards an external threat like the one that nowadays Russia seems to pose is completely different. The Baltic states, they will have the willingness to do whatever it takes to defend themselves. It's less so maybe in Italy, it's less so maybe in Spain, in other places of Europe where the perception of the danger is different. Maybe in Italy, we have a high perception of danger coming from the Mediterranean, which probably Finland doesn't care much of.
Yeah.
So you see that this shock is healthy because it brings finally to the forefront these themes that have been for so many years neglected.
It's very interesting. When you say the Mediterranean, for people listening, is it fair to say, certainly in the post 9/11 and counterterrorism fight, there was a concern of, foreign fighters coming into Europe. When you describe the Mediterranean, what comes to mind for you, just for Americans to kind of understand when you talk about the Mediterranean?
It's the huge immigration pressure that we are facing, and it's the energy route. We have two big energy routes, one coming from east, from Russia, and then southwards, and the other one is coming from Libya, from Algeria, in part now also from Turkey. So the big issues here are, terrorism, especially though it's immigration and energy.
Yeah. And Roberto, you've obviously, you mentioned Russia being in your backyard, effectively, as you described this, the Mediterranean, Russia in your backyard. You've spent quite a bit of time looking at security in your career, in particular, looking at Russia. As you look at both the U.S. position with the Kremlin right now and what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, is there anything you would advise world leaders, not just in the U.S., but in the EU as well, to do to better position themselves against Russia in the future, from what you know, having worked this issue for so long?
I think we need to engage with Russia. We have to find a way to engage with Russia and think about the results of our actions and of our words. There must be some level of strategic empathy to be rebuilt. We have deep connections with Russia. Italy, Europe in general, and Russia, we share culture, we share music, we share economical interests. So we have to somehow to amend this. Of course, this depends a lot on the counterpart. So we have to be very clear and set a common European strategic interest if we want to engage with Russia. And this is currently not the case. We are still going spot-wise, nation by nation by nation. For example, now there is the debate of a European force to protect Ukraine. They say the peacekeeping force. Would it be a peacekeeping force? I'm not very sure if we can name it as a peacekeeping force. It should be a peace enforcement force, or better say that a deterrence force. Who is willing in Europe to engage in an open military confrontation with Russia. So these are we still have no common view. I think the debate is sterile about responsibilities. The responsibilities are very clear. There was one nation that crossed the borders of another nation with their tanks. So this closes for me any other fear of NATO enlargement and this. Yeah, everything is true, but everything could have been dealt differently.
I was going to ask, if you look forward 3-4 months, what do you think the situation will be with Russia and Ukraine at that point in time?
I hope there will be a stop to bloodshed on both sides. The framework within this is going to take place because I think it's going to take place. It's still very foggy to me. It could be a ceasefire. It could be some sort of peace agreement. There will be or not be security guarantees for Ukraine. Our prime minister is suggesting a sort of Article 5 for Ukraine. So instead, sending boots on the ground, which will be very difficult and very little effective now, giving Ukraine let's say an Article 5 status, which means being willing to help to provide active security measures for Ukraine, could be a good way to end this, to give Ukraine some effective security guarantee. But going back to your question, I think in 3-4 months, the shooting could be ended in a way or another. If this is going to be with a complete defeat of Ukraine, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I surely hope not so.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, Mint Mobile, and we'll get right back to this combat story. I don't know about you, but I like keeping my money where I can see it. Unfortunately, traditional big wireless carriers also seem to like keeping my money too. After years of overpaying for wireless, I finally got fed up from crazy high wireless bills, bogus fees, and free perks that actually cost more in the long run and switched to Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile is what I use for my Combat Story account. It's worked flawlessly when I'm at home and when I'm traveling. Say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. Ditch overpriced wireless and get 3 months of premium wireless service from Mint Mobile for $15 a month. If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/combatstory. That's mintmobile.com/combatstory. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. And now, back to this combat story. And now if we pivot slightly to Asia Pacific, as you mentioned, important for Italy and the EU, but also not exactly your backyard. Your work now in the private sector focuses on different parts of the world, not necessarily Asia, but I'm sure there's Asian influence from China all over the world. Could you just speak how you see Chinese influence globally and some of the international security concerns that you face or anticipate with China from a European perspective or Italian perspective?
The pressure of Chinese intellectual property predation is growing day by day, and we feel it. One of the outcomes that maybe this current administration is trying to reach is distancing away a bit Russia from China. It could be one of the reasons for these dramatic changes. I think China is looking at what's happening in Ukraine with interest, but it's still not willing to enter in a direct confrontation with the West. There is the question of Taiwan looming, and so at some point something is going to happen. I wonder if the rare earth deal with Ukraine has something to do with this.
How so? Interesting. I hadn't put that together.
Yeah, I mean, Taiwan is one of the biggest sources for rare earth. So if you can have an alternative, it could be helpful. It's strategic thinking, it's supply chain.
Yeah.
So China has set themselves as a definite world power now. They don't need to have the recognition that somebody else is so desperately looking for. So I think things are evolving positively for them without needing further engagement or a higher level of confrontation.
And then maybe the last, as we kind of look back to European security, you mentioned energy with kind of the northern and southern streams, but just energy security in general. How do you see that playing out with Europe's overall security in general? How interconnected is that?
You mean the energy supply?
Yeah, energy in general, energy supply, energy security with Europe's thinking.
Energy security, I think it's one of the main, if not the main, along with immigration, control of immigration, it's one of the main security issues that Europe has. And all the drama around Nord Stream 2 proven this, I think, very clearly to everybody. We in Italy, we still have a no nuclear power policy. I think this needs to be revised, and it's going to be revised. Yeah, it's part of this, dream of a perfect Europe. So we blame the Americans to be arrogant very frequently, but I think we have our dose of arrogance as well. So we wanted to be the best and the cleanest and all this green energy and everything. So no, we need to diversify our energy influx, and we did it successfully after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But we need to develop our capability to produce energy. And for us, the nuclear option, I think, is the only real feasible one.
And I think it goes hand in hand with artificial intelligence and the way things are going, with the energy requirements needed there, and for people to want to compete and stay competitive. Energy is going to be a key part of that going forward. So having the nuclear capability will be.
Yes, and in general, in terms also of economic security, there is a much criticism on the tariffs now, on the issue of tariffs. But I think Europe has a lot to do. We have to do our own homework. There were recently studies that the set of regulations and norms for internal commerce in Europe is equivalent to a 41% tariff on internal trade.
Wow.
So before, okay, it's not nice. Tariffs are, to me, are a very dangerous instrument for both who applies them and who receives them. Mm-hmm. But we can also improve our economical security by making life easier for ourselves by ourselves.
Yeah. Interesting point. It reminds me, tariffs are so front and center now, just with the way the Trump administration has been using them with China and the rest of the world. For so long, that has been, sanctions have been another measure that people use to incentivize or change course. What have you seen in terms of sanctions levied, whether Russia or other entities? How effective have you seen those be over your time in civil service?
I don't think they were dramatically effective.
Yeah.
We started our conversation referring to books. One of the books I read a couple of years ago is called Disrupting Time. It's the very interesting story of an American watchmaker, Walting. They were the number one. At one point, they introduced new ways of working, a new organization of work, industrialization. So at one point in time, they became the number one worldwide. And then in Switzerland, especially in Switzerland, they started building up a very strong competition. So what was the response? Tariffs. Okay. This nurtured the American market for a couple of decades. But then at the end, it brought to the collapse of the American watchmaker industry. So it's a very interesting story, I think.
Yeah.
And by the way, within this story, there was a very nice intelligence addendum, because the Swiss sent a couple of undercover experts to the Centennial exhibition, and they picked all what they needed to pick up from the Americans, brought it back to Switzerland, applied this into the Swiss framework, and then managed to revolutionize the market. It's a very interesting story.
It's its own intellectual property insights and intelligence. Roberto, just on more of a personal note, I'm curious, you've had a very long career in civil service, in the military, in the private sector. Are there one or two places you've visited that you just really love or think back on fondly?
Yes, but I'm not supposed to mention them.
Well, it doesn't have to be in an operational context. You could have just visited, maybe.
Oh, I visited many places, and my postings were extended over several years. So it's clear that you develop a bond. You develop an interest to the people, to the culture, to the nature of places. Today, maybe just shooting out. It's Serbia, Montenegro.
Yeah.
Maybe because my eldest son is coming today with his new girlfriend, and she's from Montenegro. So
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, Roberto, I'm so appreciative of the time. Is there anything else you'd want to leave this American audience with as we wrap up here?
I want appeal to the American folks, yes, of course, that don't consider us random nations, as somebody recently said. Remember that we fought along you. You freed us from the Nazi fascist regimes. And I think we gave back what we needed to give back. I had friends, comrades that were wounded, killed in operations around the world along your brave soldiers. So Europe really loves the States, and you should be considering a little bit our emotions as well.
Agreed. We just for people listening, obviously, who know my background, many European nations supported us post 9/11 very closely in the battlefields and in the shadows as well. It goes, they may not have seen all of that, of course, but they were right there with us. So well said, Roberto. Thank you so much for the time. Enjoy your time with your son.
It's really, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me. And maybe we'll do something in the future.
I hope so.
Celebrating a stable and long-lasting peace.
Yes, that sounds great. Just a quick word from our sponsor, Delete Me. Having spent many years in the security space, I'm very aware of how much personal info is out there and what determined people can do with it, from identity theft to phishing, harassment, doxing, unwanted spam calls, and more. I've been doxed in the past, and it's something I do not want to experience again. That's why I personally choose Delete Me. Delete Me is a subscription service that removes your personal info from hundreds of data brokers. Delete Me sends you regular, personalized privacy reports showing what info they found, where they found it, and what they removed. Delete Me isn't just a one-time service. Delete Me is always working for you, constantly monitoring and removing the personal information you don't want on the internet. I got my most recent report earlier this month, and it reviewed over 1,800 listings. To put it simply, Delete Me does all the hard work of wiping your and your family's personal information from data broker websites. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting COMBAT to 64000. Text COMBAT to 64,000. That's COMBAT to 64000. Disclaimer, message and data rates may apply. See terms for details.